Here we go. So this is the fire pit that I built, and I wanted to talk to you about how I put it all together. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and this is the one of many that really inspired me and gave me a lot of ideas. But then I ran into Costco and came across the Solo stove, and I thought, oh, this could save me so much time. So I put it in the backyard, and I looked at it, and it looked ridiculous. My dog was bigger than the Solo stove, and I decided to take it back. So I went to Amazon and I ordered this metal ring because that is a very key part of making a smokeless fire pit. And that was my goal. I wanted to have a fire pit, but I wanted it to be smokeless. Next, I determined where in the yard would be perfect to avoid spreading the fire. Then I went to a rock place and I found this beautiful one, but it was $1,200 and I still had to haul it home and build it. All I really needed was the top pieces, but nobody sells them. At the time, it never even occurred to me to film the part of digging, but I did remove all the lawn from the area where the circle was going to be, and I got it down to the dirt so I could level all the block out perfectly. And then once I had the base layer, I built it up 3 layers high like you're supposed to. And it looked so shallow and I hated the look. I mean, it just was not right. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna need more block than this. No one tells you how many retaining wall blocks you're gonna need. It's 14, and that'll give you a 37-inch inner diameter. Next part is to remove 3 blocks because that's where the air is gonna suck in. You're gonna then take those blocks, you're gonna break them in half, and then you're gonna take a half of each and put them in each gap to create these nice little channels around the base. They're also gonna support the next layer on top. You're gonna have to split 2 of these in half. You're gonna need one of these. I picked it up at Home Depot. This one's called Target Guard. It's a concrete chisel. We're gonna use it to split that block. It cost me about $11. What I'm demonstrating is how I'm scoring the top of the block right in the middle. And by hitting it 2 or 3 times, and I'm sure it could be done better by a professional, but if you do this 2 or 3 times to get a nice little rut, then when you flip over the block and hit the exact same area from the underside, it breaks in half beautifully. Two pieces, perfect. So that bottom layer needed 11 blocks and then 3 of the half blocks to create the perfect circle. And then you build up all the rest of the blocks, staggering them all the way up. Then inside I put a large 24-inch by 24-inch concrete pad for the firewood, and I put some white rock around it so I wouldn't have to see the dirt. I'm about to do something I've not done before. I need to build some forms to pour some concrete because I want to make the shelf or the cap that goes around my fire pit. And I watched a video on YouTube of how he made it, and he cut out all the foam, and I was like, but I own a CNC machine. I went ahead and flipped the sheet over because it was slightly curved, and this way it would have a good grip on the table because the vacuum is sucking it down. So I'm going to do a quick test run. So the first piece cut out fine. It did not completely go through, which is intentional. I wanted a little bit of skin underneath because I don't want these pieces to fly off. I did adjust my depth just a hair to make sure it's continuous throughout the whole sheet. And now I'm gonna do the run. Let's do this. So the CNC machine is actually a router with a router bit. You could use it to cut acrylic, you could use it to cut wood. I'm using the same bit to cut the foam, which is very simple to cut. I saw no reason to install a razor blade for this process. It was doing exactly what I needed, and nothing was getting burned. The nice thing about having it cut with a computer is all the curves are perfect. It's not going to be hand cut and look rough and uneven, which was my goal, to have perfect concrete caps. I had to blow everything off so that way there would be nothing in the actual groove lines, because I needed to take a razor blade and I'll cut through the rest of the foam or the little bit of plastic on the backing to get all the pieces loose. Here's our first piece. Nice. All right, so that is basically what I'm looking at. I want to make sure that the frame fit properly, and I'm happy with that. Now that all the pieces are cut out, I'm going to start putting them together. I'm going to use contact cement to glue it. I'm going to use tape to reinforce it. I'm going to put down this drop cloth to protect Minion, because this is a great work surface, as you can see. And then I'll use silicone inside the seams when it's finally built. I got to work, and I did one piece after another. I thought about peeling off the plastic, and I thought about a lot of stuff, but all that mattered was getting the glue on there. The contact cement did not work out well with that foam at all. It was melting the material and cratering it. So it actually made my project a little thinner because it was eroding the exact edges I was hoping to maintain. So instead I decided to stop. I tried doing a thin coat on the second one and it did the same thing. And I was like, okay, no more glue. I'm just gonna use tape, and then I use silicone on the inside perimeter to help hold it all together, and also to kind of give me, hopefully, a soft edge where the lip of the concrete will be, so it won't be just a really hard, sharp edge. I smoothed out the silicone with my finger, working my way all the way around the perimeter as well as up the joint of all the four corners. And I tried to be aware not to leave any kind of residue behind, because this is literally, whatever you see in there when the concrete goes in, that will show up in the concrete when you peel it off later. And I didn't get it perfect, but I did my best, and I'm not going to complain about what I did. Now that I'm done, I'm just going to let it cure, and I'm thinking tomorrow I'm going to be too busy, so I'll probably be doing this concrete work on Sunday, but our weather's supposed to be good and in the 72-degree range, which would be ideal. It's concrete day. See? Jackie came to join me. So as you can see, the color of the stone, it's kind of, I don't know, in the sandy look. I debated what color I wanted this top section to be, and there was something, I don't know what it was. It was a light color, which might have been okay. This is probably too dark, but what if I use like 50% strength to get kind of a light brown? I think that might look good. I purchased chicken wire to put inside the center of each slab to reinforce the concrete, because it seemed like it would be a good idea. Of course, I'm doing this late in the day and I'm running out of daylight. I might have, I don't know, an hour's left worth of light, so I might just be making 2 of these. Maybe I'll just be making 1. I've never made this before. In that YouTube video that I watched where the guy made forms similar to this, he sprayed it down with cooking oil. And I thought, hey, works good for him, it's gonna work good enough for me. I had a whole can full, so I went ahead and I sprayed down the inside of the foam and all the walls. And then I took a paper towel and I smeared it around to make sure there was no places that weren't oiled up. So hopefully this form will come off once the concrete has dried and turned hard. I've mixed concrete in the past. It's not my favorite job, but you know what? Just start, get it done, get it behind you. So I was mixing up 2 bags of 80 pounds of concrete in here. So 160 pounds of powder with enough water to get the right consistency, which came out to somewhere around 12 liters of water, I think, maybe a little bit more. And it probably takes me about 6 or 8 minutes to fully mix it where there's no dry powder at all and everything is completely mush like you want it to be. If you've never worked with concrete before, the main rule is don't put in too much water. You put in how much you need, and then you add a little bit more, and you add a little bit more. If it becomes a liquid soup and you have this super watery stuff, it's going to be really hard to use it properly, and it's going to be frustrating in something like this project where you have to pour it into a form. You want this to be like mud so you can play with it and pack it in there. If you don't want to do what I'm doing here and you'd rather own a concrete mixer or rent one, you definitely could do that. But since this project didn't need as many bags as I anticipated, I'm really glad I didn't go out to rent a piece of equipment like that. You just have to keep turning it over and chopping it up and turning it over and splashing a little water, You just keep working it until you've got a good, even consistency. What I'm doing here is trying to get to the very bottom of the wheelbarrow to make sure there's no dry dust underneath all the wet concrete. And I really just want to use half the bottle. Would have helped if I'd shaken it first. Maybe. All right, that seems to be about 50% of the bottle. Mix it up. Believe it or not, it probably took another 6 minutes to make this stuff look completely brown throughout. I just thought, add some color and stir it around and it'll be all right. I thought about stopping and just letting it be marbled. Oh well, it's done. That was way harder than I expected, of course. But look, it's brown. And I hope it dries and looks... I made sure to put the forms on top of some flat concrete because I want my project to be flat and perfect. And I also was aware of the shape of the form, and I was thinking about how the concrete lying in there might expand it outwards. So the first form I'm filling with some concrete, and I'll put the other form against it, so that way that big bow will be pressed up against the other big bow and kind of be self-supporting. This will make more sense in a couple of minutes. I just scooped it in a shovelful at a time, and then I tried to make sure to really pack it into those corners along the edges, because the edges are what you're going to see. I mean, they're even more important than the middle. Now, you definitely want to keep tamping down, and you want to shake out any air pockets so there's no big air holes in there. And so I worked the shovel at different angles, and I would stab it downward, and I would pat it inward, and then of course later I did more, which you'll see here in a moment. I know this part of the video may seem kind of long, but at the same time, if you've never done this and you're wanting to do this, I'm hoping this will help you be able to do something similar and have the confidence to accomplish it. Because this isn't super hard. It is tedious and it's hard work, but you can do it. This is not something that only a qualified person can do. With the form half filled up, I went ahead and I put in my chicken wire. And let me tell you, those little corners, you got to make sure they're folded down or flip it over and then bend it down, because as I was spreading the concrete and trying to get it nice and pretty on top, they kept poking up. Take the time to make sure it's really in the middle and that it's not going to expose anywhere along the edges either. Your chicken wire should be a little less wide than the form itself, so it's within the concrete, but there's no wire sticking out when you peel the form off later, because that'll just spoil the look of your project. Now I'm tamping it again looking to remove any kind of air that might be trapped in there. And I think I did the best I could. There are different tools on the market that might help with this, but this is a small DIY project, and I just felt like I could make this work with a shovel and some tenacity. The second form is now butted up against the first one so that those two outer walls are pressed together so that it won't swell and expand that way. The inner curve will not expand outward nearly as much as that outer curve would. So now I'm just going to go ahead and fill up the second tray, because the first one is just sitting there idling. There's no reason to worry about finishing it off right now. What I need to do is get the concrete in both trays completely and get that step done before I go to the next area. Again, pay attention to those corners and those edges. Make sure there's concrete all the way in there. If you have to poke it in there with a stick, you can do that. I used a shovel for this whole process. In the one video I watched, he used a dog food scoop, but I didn't want to sacrifice mine for this project. Then once you have enough concrete in there, it's going to be time to put in the chicken wire. Don't forget that step. That's important. And then place the concrete on top of the chicken wire to weigh it down. That'll kind of help with its weird curvature, and that way you can make sure all the wires are poked down, they're centered, and then completely hide it with another layer of concrete. It's sort of like baking a cake. We definitely want to fill the form all the way to the top, higher than the top. You want to have plenty of concrete because you're going to press down on there to push the concrete into the form fully, hopefully to push out any kind of air, which I've mentioned several times, and press down the rock and the rubble and all that. We want to get it full so it'll be solid. You may be thinking, what if I have too much concrete in there? That's okay. It's all going to make sense in a few more minutes. But for now, we just want to fill it up completely so we're not having to go get more concrete later. Good news. It turns out 2 bags was enough for 2 of those curves. That means I only need 2 more bags out of the 8 bags I bought total. If you happen to own any concrete tools of any kind, that's going to be helpful. But in the case here, I'm just using a 2x4 to spread it evenly and to smooth it out. Now I had a little too much in my first form. That was on purpose. I'm scooping it out and dumping in the second one so it's reachable in case I need to get some back. Now I'll just take my 2x4 and I'm kind of shaking and pressing down and kind of tapping as I work my way across the radius or the curve. And then I repeat and repeat and repeat. So I'm going to do a little bit of that in this video just so you can kind of see the process, because sometimes I feel these edits are so short you don't really learn what's going to happen and you don't really understand how it's going to be accomplished. This tamping and the sliding to the right or to the left is again shaking out any air, forcing down more concrete and making sure there's no air pockets whatsoever. So I'm going to continually do this over and over. And I probably spent 15 minutes working my way back and forth. I'm sure a professional would have knocked it out in 3 minutes flat. But I'm not a professional. I don't pretend to be one. I just like to make things look really nice. And so when I go to this much trouble, I'm going to take my time to really make sure I'm happy with the results. If you've ever watched professionals work the concrete, they fill it up, they work it, they shake it, and then a little while later, a guy gets on there and starts smoothing it out all beautifully. Same principle. We have to let this sit, and then we come back to it a few minutes later or an hour later and kind of work it again. It also depends what time of year you're doing it and how hot it is outside. But we want to make sure that everything looks really good, and we want to follow up on it 30 minutes later or an hour later. And if we have to smooth it again, we will. And if we have to add a little bit of water, we can, because we want to get this looking really, really good. 2 down, 2 to go. So I am guessing this is going to be my final color, which, I don't know, could we even call that tan at this point? I think it's still drying. I don't know. I mean, it's been like 36 hours. Hopefully this matches that and doesn't look ridiculous, but at least it won't be gray. It's time for round 2. So I'm going to do the other 2 pieces and get it done. So I'm doing this a couple days later. Again, we had some decent weather. And the good news is I did everything in time lapse. So you're not going to have to suffer through a whole bunch of me explaining this stuff over and over to you. You learned it in the first part of this video. So now we're just going to kind of see me do it. Hopefully I'll do it better the second round than the first because I've had some practice. But when I'm done with this, I'll never have to do it again. So I'll probably forget everything, which is why I'm glad I documented this for YouTube. In the lower left part of your screen, you'll notice those 2 first pieces are nearly completely dry. They're not quite uniform in color, but they're getting there. When smoothing off those forms, you're going to notice a little bit will roll off the edges, and that's completely normal. You want that to happen. And as you can see, very little concrete remained. Just half a scoop left. Now these 2 are going to have to dry out fully for a couple of days. It's time to drill some holes. I'm going to do a bunch of 1/2-inch holes all the way around the perimeter. I'm just using this tapered bit. It's so much simpler. Each hole is drilled in about 10 seconds flat. Using that stepper bit, I'm drilling a 1/2-inch hole every 2 inches all the way around the circumference of that metal insert. I'm using some degreaser to wipe down all the WD-40 that's spattered around on the metal because I'm about to paint it so that all the exposed raw metal will be covered with a high temp spray paint. All the holes have been protected with paint, so that should help avoid some rusting issues. And I also did on the underside, backside and underside. I'm gonna buy some mortar because I want to fill in these large gaps on the backside. I just want my big holes at the bottom to be open, but I think I want the rest of it sealed up. I'm gonna go ahead and mix up the mortar now, and I plan to use my wheelbarrow, but I have this weird feeling I should have done it in a bucket. So let's see what happens. This mortar mix was about $8, $9 at Home Depot. I added the right amount of water according to the instructions again, and I mixed it completely until it was uniform and muddy, but I needed it to be thick enough that it wouldn't just like drip off a trowel. A funny thing was happening while I was filming this sequence. The glove was rubbing against the side of my wristwatch, which was communicating with my phone, and it was gradually zooming in. So this is really funny, unusual zoom session, and I just thought I'd include it because it makes me laugh. But obviously I didn't include all 6 minutes of it because that would drive you crazy. Initially I troweled in all of the mortar into the top gaps all the way around the top perimeter. I wanted to make sure that filled in because the metal flange that sits on top would not cover those gaps. I wanted that completely dense. And then I wanted to fill those little spots lower down, and that was a little more tricky, but I actually got better. The further I went, the more sense it made. It's not perfect, but what I did was fill those gaps as best I could, but I wanted to make sure I had enough mortar to do the top because I want to use it to level the benches. Let's see if the concrete comes out of the forms. Looks pretty good. These things held up pretty well. Not bad for DIY. I have 80 pounds of concrete in this one piece, so I'm pretty sure it's going to hold up long term. Physically, it's not perfect, and I think I might have some weird situations where the two pieces butt because the form swelled, but it didn't cost me $600 either. Now, before you judge my mortar work, I'll have you know I have plenty of experience with Play-Doh as a child. Fortunately, I had enough mortar to work my way all the way around the circle so that all 4 caps fit on there beautifully. Then I worked my way around the bottom edge to make sure it was nice and clean. Originally, I wanted to put some kind of stuff in here to give some little tiny holes, but it happened naturally. I'm very happy with this look. Specifically, there are 6 of these larger holes that are designed to bring air into the fire so that it can burn cleanly. I like how the mortar came out. I made sure that this fire pit was far enough away from the bushes and the fence and the house, so everything's between 20 and 30 feet away. Here we go. We're 5 minutes in and there's plenty of smoke, but it is a brand new fire. And I think it takes 15 minutes to get there. All right, the fire's been going for 11 minutes. And I don't see a lot of smoke coming off of there. I see a little bit. But I was told the 15-minute mark is when it's gonna just be completely cleaned up. So it looks pretty good right now. We are at the 15-minute mark. I have a feeling it'll be even better in about 10 more minutes. So maybe it takes a little bit longer, but still, I do not have this big cloud belching out of here. What makes this a smokeless fire pit? Well, it's the design specifically. You have air coming in around the bottom. You have all those little holes inside the metal frame. There's cooler air between the block and the metal that comes in through those little half-inch holes to kind of eat the smoke as it's burning. Also, I did order this from Amazon. It was a 36-inch screen that folds in half, and I could put it on top to kind of use as a spark arrestor. Everyone I talk to wants me to throw a steak on it, but I just wanted to have a way to kind of keep the flames inside and the sparks from jumping out. I had to add 2 more logs because I didn't get enough fire. Smokeless. I started this fire about 5 minutes ago. Let's do a check for smoke. That thing is amazing. I definitely wanted to demonstrate several fires in this video and not just one at the end, because I always feel like that's a little deceiving. Does it work? Is it consistent? So I did 3 or 4 fires during the making of this video, and I found that it works really well. Is it perfect? No, but for the most part, I've had a really smokeless experience. Yesterday's fire got really weird black smoke. The wood didn't even want to burn. It was hissing. There was gray pouring out. I was like, okay, those are some weird logs. So I threw other wood on there and got my good fire going. So it won't be every time, but I think if you want to mimic this, you'll be really, really happy with the end results. So what did this cost me? Well, there was the chisel, silicone, tape, the pink foam, the 56 blocks, the 4 bags of 80 pounds of concrete, the 1 bag of 80 pounds of mortar mix, the white marble rock, the concrete pad, the metal liner. Came out to around $400, $425. I think that was a phenomenal price to pay for what I ended up with. A nice large fire pit with an inside 36-inch diameter, an external 58-inch diameter, the perfect place to hang out with friends. I hope you enjoyed this video.